On December 7, 1941, the serene Sunday morning in Hawaii was shattered as Japanese aircraft launched a surprise assault on the U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor. The attack was devastating, sinking or damaging 19 ships, including 8 battleships, and destroying over 180 aircraft. More than 2,400 Americans lost their lives. The immediate impact of this bold strike was a decisive blow to American naval power in the Pacific. But the long-term consequence was even more significant. The United States, previously neutral in the global conflict, was now fully committed to World War II. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's address to Congress, declaring December 7th as a date which will live in infamy, galvanized the American public and government into action. The surprise and intensity of the attack left the U.S. forces in disarray. Despite valiant efforts by American personnel to defend their ships and facilities, the damage was extensive. The attack on Pearl Harbor had achieved its immediate objective, but it also provoked a fierce response from the United States, setting the stage for a prolonged and brutal conflict in the Pacific. Chapter 2. The Empire's Tentacles Spread. With the United States reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan wasted no time in capitalizing on its initial success. The Japanese military launched a series of coordinated offensives across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, executing their strategy of rapid expansion with precision and brutality. One of Japan's most significant victories in this period was the fall of Singapore in February 1942. Singapore, a major British stronghold and often referred to as the Gibraltar of the East, was considered impregnable. The British had fortified the island heavily, expecting an attack from the sea. However, Japanese forces, led by General Tomoyuki Yamashita, launched a daring overland assault from the Malay Peninsula. Using bicycles and light tanks, they swiftly advanced through the jungle, bypassing British defenses. The British defenders, caught off guard by the speed and direction of the Japanese advance, were quickly overwhelmed. After a brief but intense battle, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival surrendered Singapore to the Japanese. Over 80,000 British, Indian, and Australian troops were taken prisoner. This defeat was a severe blow to British prestige and marked the largest surrender of British-led forces in history. The fall of Singapore demonstrated Japan's military prowess and strategic acumen. Simultaneously, Japanese forces advanced through the Philippines, another crucial territory. Despite fierce resistance led by General Douglas MacArthur, the Philippine defense crumbled. Japanese forces, under the command of General Masaharu Homma, executed a series of amphibious landings, isolating and defeating American and Filipino units piecemeal. The defenders were forced to retreat to the Bataan Peninsula, where they endured a grueling siege. By April 1942, the situation had become untenable. The defenders of Bataan, exhausted and out of supplies, surrendered. The infamous Bataan Death March followed, where tens of thousands of American and Filipino prisoners were forced to march over 60 miles under brutal conditions, resulting in thousands of deaths. The final stronghold, Corregidor, fell in May 1942, completing Japan's conquest of the Philippines. MacArthur's dramatic escape to Australia, vowing "I shall return," became a symbol of hope for the Allied forces. Japan's blitzkrieg didn't stop there. They seized control of Burma, the Dutch East Indies, and parts of New Guinea, swiftly securing resources critical to their war effort, such as oil, rubber, and tin. In Burma, Japanese forces launched an invasion in January 1942, quickly overwhelming the British and Chinese defenders. The capture of Rangoon, Burma's capital, severed the Burma Road, a vital supply line to Chinese forces resisting Japanese occupation. The Dutch East Indies, rich in oil, were a key target for Japan. Japanese forces conducted amphibious assaults on key islands, including Borneo, Java, and Sumatra. The defenders, composed of Dutch, British, Australian, and American forces, were unable to stem the tide of Japanese advances. By March 1942, Japan had secured control of the region, ensuring a steady supply of oil for its military machine. In New Guinea, Japanese forces aimed to establish a base for operations against Australia. They captured Rabaul on the island of New Britain, turning it into a major Japanese stronghold. The speed and efficiency of Japan's conquests in the first half of 1942 starkly contrasted with Germany's struggles in the harsh Russian winter on the Eastern Front. The rapid expansion fortified Japan's strategic positions and provided the raw materials necessary to sustain their military campaigns. Chapter 3: A World on Fire, Global Implications. Japan's victories in Southeast Asia and the Pacific had profound global repercussions. The Allies were now grappling with a formidable Axis power on two fronts, Europe and the Pacific. The swift and brutal nature of Japan's advance threatened to sever critical Allied supply lines, jeopardizing the flow of materials and reinforcements essential for the war effort. Countries like Australia and India, which had previously felt relatively secure, now faced the real and terrifying prospect of invasion. In Australia, the fall of Singapore and the advance through New Guinea brought the war perilously close to home. The Battle of Darwin in February 1942, where Japanese aircraft bombed the northern Australian city, underscored the immediate threat. The attack caused significant damage and loss of life, leading to fears of a full-scale invasion. The Australian government, led by Prime Minister John Curtin, called for urgent reinforcements and closer cooperation with the United States. The construction of defensive fortifications and the mobilization of the population for war efforts became a priority. The threat of invasion galvanized the Australian public, fostering a sense of unity and determination to resist the Japanese advance. In India, the capture of Burma cut off the vital supply route known as the Burma Road, which had been a lifeline for Chinese forces resisting Japanese occupation. The fall of Burma also opened the possibility of a Japanese invasion of India, causing widespread fear and uncertainty. The British colonial administration in India faced growing pressure to defend the subcontinent while dealing with increasing demands for independence from Indian nationalist leaders. The psychological impact of Japan's conquests was profound. The rapid and seemingly unstoppable advance created a sense of urgency and desperation among the Allied powers. It became clear that a concerted and coordinated effort was necessary to halt Japan's expansion and turn the tide of the war. The global implications extended beyond the immediate threat of invasion. Japan's victories disrupted international trade and shipping routes, affecting economies worldwide. The loss of Southeast Asian territories deprived the Allies of valuable resources and bases, complicating their war efforts in both the Pacific and European theaters. The fear and uncertainty generated by Japan's expansion also had a galvanizing effect on the Allied nations. The United States, Britain, and other Allied powers recognized the need for greater cooperation and coordination to counter the Axis threat. Diplomatic and military alliances were strengthened, and efforts to mobilize resources and manpower intensified. Japan's rapid expansion in the Pacific was not just a series of military victories, it was a strategic shift that reshaped the global balance of power. The Allies were now facing a formidable adversary that had demonstrated its ability to wage war with speed and brutality. The stage was set for a series of epic confrontations that would determine the fate of the Pacific and, ultimately, the outcome of World War II. Chapter 4: The Battle of the Coral Sea, May 1942. As Japan's forces continued their rapid expansion across the Pacific, the Allies prepared to counter the Japanese advance. The Battle of the Coral Sea, fought from May 4th to May 8th, 1942, marked the first major naval engagement in history where the opposing fleets never saw each other. Instead, aircraft launched from carriers played the central role, highlighting the growing importance of air power in naval warfare. The strategic significance of the Coral Sea lay in its location. The Japanese aimed to capture Port Moresby in New Guinea, which would threaten Australia and cut off Allied supply routes. The Allies, aware of the Japanese plans through intercepted communications, mobilized to stop the invasion. The battle began on May 4th with preliminary skirmishes involving American and Japanese aircraft. On May 7th, the first major clash occurred when American carrier planes attacked and sank the Japanese light carrier Shoho. This initial success was tempered by the loss of the US destroyer Sims and the oiler Neosho, which were also attacked and sunk by Japanese aircraft. The following day, May 8th, saw the main engagement between the two carrier fleets. The US carriers, USS Lexington and USS Yorktown, launched aircraft to strike the Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku. Simultaneously, Japanese aircraft targeted the American carriers. The battle was intense and chaotic, with dive bombers and torpedo planes from both sides attempting to strike decisive blows. The USS Lexington was heavily damaged by torpedoes and bombs, leading to uncontrollable fires that forced the crew to abandon ship. The carrier eventually sank, but the Yorktown managed to survive despite sustaining damage. On the Japanese side, the Shokaku was severely damaged and had to withdraw, while the Zuikaku's air wings suffered significant losses, reducing its operational effectiveness. While the Battle of the Coral Sea was tactically inconclusive, with both sides suffering substantial losses, it was a strategic victory for the Allies. The Japanese invasion force was forced to retreat, halting their advance towards Australia. The battle marked the first time that a Japanese offensive had been checked and demonstrated the critical role of aircraft carriers in modern naval warfare. The Coral Sea engagement also provided valuable lessons for both sides. The Americans learned the importance of coordination between carriers and their air groups, while the Japanese recognized the need to improve their anti-aircraft defenses and carrier tactics. These lessons would soon be put to the test in the pivotal Battle of Midway. Chapter 5: Midway, the Turning Point, June 1942. Just a month after the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Pacific Theater witnessed another crucial confrontation, the Battle of Midway. This battle, fought from June 4th to June 7th, 1942, is widely regarded as the turning point in the Pacific War, where the balance of power shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. Japan's plan for Midway was ambitious. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sought to lure the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a trap by attacking the Midway Atoll, a strategic outpost in the Pacific. By drawing the American carriers into battle, Yamamoto hoped to deliver a crushing blow to U.S. naval power, paving the way for Japanese dominance in the Pacific. However, the U.S. had a crucial advantage: intelligence. American codebreakers, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had successfully deciphered Japanese communications, revealing the details of Yamamoto's plan. Armed with this knowledge, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the U.S. Pacific Fleet commander, prepared an ambush of his own. On June 3rd, American reconnaissance aircraft spotted the Japanese invasion force approaching Midway. The following day, June 4th, the battle began in earnest. The initial Japanese air assault on Midway Island inflicted damage on the airfield and installations, but American forces were prepared and responded with anti-aircraft fire. Meanwhile, American carrier planes from the USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and the hastily repaired USS Yorktown launched a series of strikes against the Japanese fleet. The key moments of the battle unfolded as American dive bombers found their targets. In a matter of minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were hit and engulfed in flames. Later, the 4th carrier, Hiryu, managed to launch a counterstrike, damaging the Yorktown, but was eventually located and destroyed by American aircraft. The sinking of the 4 Japanese carriers, along with the loss of their experienced air crews, dealt a devastating blow to the Japanese Navy. The Battle of Midway was a decisive victory for the Allies. It not only halted Japan's expansion, but also marked the beginning of a sustained offensive by the United States in the Pacific. The success at Midway was due in large part to the skill and bravery of the American pilots and the effectiveness of the code-breaking efforts that provided crucial intelligence. The battle showcased the importance of carrier-based air power and the strategic value of intelligence in modern warfare. In the aftermath of Midway, the Japanese Navy was forced into a defensive posture, unable to replace the lost carriers and aircrews quickly. The United States, on the other hand, continued to build and commission new carriers, increasing its naval strength and gaining the initiative in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway was not just a tactical victory, it was a strategic turning point that shifted the momentum of the war in favor of the Allies. It demonstrated that the Japanese Empire, despite its early successes, could be defeated. The stage was set for a series of Allied offensives that would push Japan back and eventually lead to its defeat. Chapter 6: A Shift in Momentum. The immediate aftermath of Midway saw a dramatic shift in the balance of power in the Pacific. The loss of 4 aircraft carriers, and hundreds of experienced pilots and crewmen crippled Japan's naval power. This loss was irreplaceable in the short term, given Japan's limited industrial capacity compared to the United States. The US, now with the initiative, began launching a series of counterattacks. The first major offensive was the Guadalcanal campaign, which began in August 1942. Guadalcanal, part of the Solomon Islands, was strategically important as it threatened Allied supply routes to Australia and New Zealand. The battle for Guadalcanal was long and brutal, lasting 6 months and involving fierce ground, naval, and air combat. The successful capture of Guadalcanal marked the first significant land victory for the Allies in the Pacific and provided a base for further operations. It also showcased the determination and resilience of American forces who endured grueling conditions and relentless Japanese attacks. The shift in momentum continued with the implementation of the island hopping strategy. This involved bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions and capturing strategically important islands, cutting off Japanese supply lines and isolating their forces. Key battles in this strategy included the capture of Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima. The relentless Allied advance culminated in the Battle of Okinawa in April 1945, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War. The fierce battle, marked by kamikaze attacks and intense ground fighting, resulted in significant casualties on both sides. However, the capture of Okinawa provided a base for the planned invasion of Japan, highlighting the inexorable advance of Allied forces. Conclusion: the period from 1941 to 1942 marked a dramatic and transformative phase in the Pacific War. Japan's initial blitzkrieg across Southeast Asia and the Pacific showcased their military prowess and strategic planning. However, key naval battles such as the Coral Sea and Midway shifted the balance of power, halting Japan's expansion and setting the stage for Allied